The moment her fingers brushed my collarbone, I still thought my daughter was going to hug me. Instead, Kara caught the garnet pendant at my throat and ripped downward. The clasp snapped. Red stones bounced and skittered across the parquet like rain on tin. The quartet faltered to silence. 150 guests froze forks, suspended champagne trembling near lips. Somewhere a waiter whispered, "Oh," and the sound seemed to carry. She stood in her wedding silk like a lighthouse turned to glass eyes bright and cutting. "Give me the deed, Mother," she said, every word made to be overheard. "The Harbor Light is ours now. Sign it over." The name of my hotel spoken as if it were a check to be endorsed hung above the gilded room. Ethan the groom shifted beside her and studied a cufflink as though it held the weather. No one moved. A woman in lilac pressed 2 fingers to her mouth. The best man found sudden business with his phone. The band leader lowered his bow and admired the floor. It was the kind of silence that has to be carried out like a heavy object. I bent slowly the way you do when you've lived long with aching joints and stubborn pride and gathered the broken chain into my palm. A garnet rolled in a small arc and stopped against my heel. I picked it up too. My hands were steady because I wouldn't allow them anything else. When I stood, Kara's smile faltered for the length of a blink. It was enough to let air back into my lungs. "You heard me," she said louder, performing certainty. 6 million. The next generation. Do it now. "I heard you," I said, not moving my eyes from hers. The ballroom at the Royal Marais glowed high arches draped in green, a spray of white roses by the bandstand, a cake like carved porcelain. In the mirrored panels I could see the whole tableau, the bride, who had been my only child, the man at her shoulder, the audience hungry for spectacle and pretending to be concerned. I turned and walked. The crowd opened by instinct the way people part for a rolling cart. My heels found the marble threshold, then the cooler hush of the foyer. The door attendants pretended to be occupied with their own cuffs. I stepped into air that smelled faintly of sea and rain, and old wood polished for company. In the vestibule mirror, a silver-haired woman looked back at me with a garnet in her palm and a crescent of red on her skin where the chain had torn free. I did not touch the mark. I opened my clutch, the same black leather I'd carried for a decade, and woke my phone with a press of my thumb. The number was in my hands before I thought it. Reed and Hollis came, the answer clipped and familiar. "Harris," I said. "It's Evelyn." A beat, then his voice changed as if he had stepped into a quieter office. "Mrs. Hale." "Are you all right?" "I am," I said. It was both true and not. "Come to the Royal Marais. Bring the packet we prepared. Tonight." He was a man who understood doors. "Once we open those, there's no closing them again." "They're already open," I said. "I'll meet you at the side entrance. 30 minutes. The call ended with a soft click that felt like a latch sliding into place. I slipped the broken chain into my clutch and closed the snap. Through the double doors, the quartet found its footing again, a cautious waltz, stitched to the edges of conversation. On the far wall hung a framed photograph, this same ballroom in another decade, women in gloves, men in narrow ties, a world that believed in certain kinds of manners and certain kinds of theft. The Harbor Light wasn't in that picture. My hotel stood 3 blocks down where the boardwalk bowed to the wind. We bought it when the roof leaked and the boiler sulked, and I learned the smell of linen steam and late coffee, the small hours when you count cash by the green light of a calculator. Tom gave me the garnet pendant our first season, a promise I wore when pipes burst and guests arrived all at once. I don't know why I thought of that now. Maybe because promises have weight and I could feel its absence against my skin. A young server hurried through the foyer with a tray of flutes and halted when he saw me, unsure if he should offer one to a mother who had just been asked to sign herself out of her life. "I'm fine," I told him, because he needed a line, and he went on. In the ladies' lounge, I washed my hands and pressed a cool cloth to the red line at my neck. The face in the mirror was the same one that moved through the Harbor Light before the staff woke. Tired at the corners, yes, still mine. I blotted dry, capped the faucet, and folded the cloth precisely, training ingrained by 1,000 rooms turned and 1,000 small griefs put into order. Back in the foyer, the doors breathed open for a pair of late guests, laughter pushing in with the perfume. At the coat check, a row of winter wraps hung like sleeping animals. I stood a moment with my hand on the brass rail and listened to the geography of the building music. Swelling voices layered a distant clink. The faint whir of the HVAC creating a season that suited the flowers. It was astonishing how everything could go on pretending. Mrs. Hale, the concierge, had come halfway from his desk. The boy couldn't be more than 22 cheeks, still holding their adolescent roundness. "Do you need anything?" "No," I said. "Thank you." He retreated with relief. I stepped outside. The night sat clean and salt-cool on the steps. The harbor threw back the city lights in shivers. Gulls stitched white arcs above the black water. Wind lifted the edge of my shawl, and the old ache between my shoulder blades announced the weather as it always did. A woman in lavender, the one from the front row, slipped out and stood a polite distance away, pretending to check a message. That was, she searched for a word in the coldest scene. Weddings are fond of them, I said. My daughter married last spring, she offered as if laying a flower on a railing. She cried because the seating chart went wrong. I suppose we were lucky. She scrolled her phone meaninglessly. I'm sorry, she added and meant it, and went back inside before sympathy could turn into anything that required work. The garnet in my palm warmed with my skin. In the dark glass, I could see the reflection of the Royal Maries behind me, grand doors, gold lettering, 2 attendants flanking the entrance like chess pieces. I had spent my life learning which doors are decoration and which are real. The real ones are not always the most ornate. On my second breath, the smell of the sea reached me properly. I counted the steps down to the sidewalk because I like to know measures and because my knees prefer truth told quietly. The street was damp from an earlier squall, and the lamps along the curb made halos on the pavement. A taxi idled the driver watching a game on his dash without the sound. I walked to the corner and stood beneath the narrow awning of the side entrance. It was a cut-through meant for deliveries and the band's smoke breaks. A man in a tuxedo jacket and no tie came out, looked past me as if I were a post, and lit a cigarette. He took 2 quick drags and stamped it out, embarrassed by his own need, then went back in. The door sighed once and settled. The night reclaimed its shape. Mrs. Hale. A voice I knew would come later tonight, calm and exact, would say my name in this light. For now there was only the hush of befores and afters. I took the broken chain from my clutch and held it up. The thin metal glinted, catching a wind-stray bead of moisture. The stone at my fingers looked like a small, steadfast ember. I put the pendant away. I straightened my shawl. I let my breathing find a rhythm steady enough to stand on. Behind me, the party collected itself into the appearance of joy. In front of me, the harbor kept its own counsel. When the church across the square tolled the quarter hour, I counted it once, not to measure waiting, but to remember I was choosing to stand. I traced with my thumb the small dent the clasp had left in my skin, felt the place where something had been taken, and the larger place where something had returned. I stayed where the wind could find me, and the doors could be found. The side entrance was a narrow rectangle of shadow where freight came and music slipped out to smoke. I stood beneath the small awning and let the harbor air rinse the ballroom from my skin. Somewhere a cork leapt, laughter rose thinned by glass and fell away. I turned the broken garnet once in my palm and slid it back into my clutch beside my phone. 30 minutes is both long and exact. It gave me room enough to breathe and uninvited to remember. When Tom and I took the harbor light, it was a building with a good spine and bad habits. The roof stuttered when the nor'easters blew. The boilers lied. The wallpaper was faithful to no era at all. We slept on a cot in the manager's office that first winter and kept a pot of coffee going in a dented percolator because it felt like heat, even when the thermostats didn't agree. Tom learned the basement with a wrench and a flashlight. I learned everything above it: linen orders, vendor temperaments, the delicate art of apologizing without surrendering. I kept each invoice paper-clipped in stacks by month, then curled a ribbon through the clip so I could grab a stack with one hand. I liked the weight of paper telling me what had been done. The pendant came at the end of that first summer when the rooms finally stopped echoing and the place smelled of soap and salt and money honestly earned. Tom fastened it with the gravity of a man who pretends not to believe in talismans. For storms, he said, smiling sideways as if the word meant more than weather. I wore it when pipes hissed and when the Friday bus arrived an hour early, and every reservation decided to check in at once. When he died quietly in a chair that still holds the shape of his shoulders, I kept fastening the chain in the mornings because some weights keep you upright. Kara learned to walk holding onto maid carts. The housekeepers tucked cookies for her in their aprons. The bellmen taught her to make a 3-finger whistle that would bounce down the stairwell and startle me into laughter. Later, older, she brought home menus from restaurants with names that sounded like verbs and announced we were due for a rebrand. The harbor light has a story, Mom, she'd say, but the story could be louder. She liked the word concept. She liked the way it looked written across the page of my ledger in her even-sure handwriting. I said yes to the ballet classes, to the extra electives, to the glossy shoes that went click-click on marble. I said yes to the program she auditioned for, and yes again when she quit one in the middle because her head wanted something different. Love can be a kind of well-stocked pantry. I kept setting bowls at the table. Ethan arrived one March in a peacoat that made him look winter-proof and a grin that never reached a corner. Kara introduced him in the lobby like a docent. "This is where the brand lives," she said, meaning the old oak desk. "Imagine it with lines cleaner, more intentional." He ran his palm along the banister, Tom's banister, rapping with his knuckles as though he could diagnose sturdiness by sound alone. "Charming," he said, making it a diagnosis. "Investors love history when it's curated." I poured coffee for them in the lounge and watched him hold the cup without drinking. "Your occupancy and shoulder months," he asked. "Do you have dashboards?" He meant the kind that make color from data. I told him I have a paper ledger, a pencil, a habit of writing the truth, and a feel for the week after a storm when the city people need to hear water louder than traffic. He nodded as if at a child showing him a drawing. It was Ethan who introduced the language of safety. He did it gently, like a man moving a chair an inch at a time. Stairs are a consideration, he said, looking toward the fire door. You've taken a fall before Kara reached for my elbow, then pressing her thumb where a tendon goes to keep the gesture from showing. A ground floor apartment near the clinic would be so much easier, Mom, she said. You could sleep past 5, read books without worrying about boilers. I don't know when concern became choreography. I do know the day they brought Ethan's parents to the Harbor Light because I wrote it down. I had arranged hydrangeas on the front desk, their heads like little clouds, and the air outside had that wet ache that promises a storm by dinner. They came in together, Martin and Joelle Grant, a pair, who had learned long ago to enter rooms like owners. Joelle took the measure of the place with one sweep her mouth a line that could mean almost anything. Martin shook my hand as if closing a deal he'd made 5 hours earlier. We've researched a marvelous residence, Joelle said, after the pleasantries were arranged on the coffee table like coasters. Chef-prepared meals, programming medical staff on site. You'd be with peers. This, she gestured toward the stairs, toward the check-in bell, toward the framed black and white of me and Tom holding a ribbon with borrowed scissors, is a burden. A treasure, Martin amended, smiling at Kara, which could help set these two on their feet. Caleb from my firm ran the numbers. The property value alone well. He tapped his folder. You'd never worry. There are moments you can feel your face go still. I pressed my fingers against the front desk's edge until I felt the small nick in the varnish Tom always promised to fix. I'm steady as I am, I said, but I appreciate the options. They stayed an hour. They left pamphlets and a card for a realtor who specialized in right-sizing and a list of addresses of other historic properties successfully transitioned by families. Kara kissed my cheek at the door. You don't have to decide today, she said. Just think with an open mind. When the door closed, I slid the bolt, something I rarely do in daytime, and stood for a minute with my forehead against the wood, the way you might lean into a wind that is pushing too hard. May, my sister, came by that night with soup in a quart container. She has a nurse's hands and a farmer's stare. You're holding your shoulders at your ears, she said, and dug her thumb into the knot below my right blade until it softened. I told her about the meeting. She took out a small calendar from her bag, the kind they used to give away at the pharmacy, and wrote 3 things on the back with her half-chewed pencil dates, names, promises. Write it all down, she said. Paper remembers. I found a narrow notebook in the office supply closet, tore off the plastic, and began on page 1 with neat, severe printing, Sunday 2 p.m. Ethan's parents, safety talk, realtor card left. I underlined the time twice. After that, I wrote more. Tuesday 10:47 a.m. Ethan in the lobby, measuring with a tape, said content capture, avoided the water stain by room 204. Thursday, 8:12 p.m., Kara asked again for keys, just in case of emergencies, declined. Monday, 3:05 p.m., bank draft to Kara for course tuition. Her text later, you're an angel. I was not an angel. I was a woman who paid bills. I met Harris because I was tired of being the only person in the room when decisions were being made. He is not the kind of lawyer that television makes into a costume. He wears brown shoes and his hair can never agree on the same shape twice in a week, and he takes notes with a fountain pen because he likes the way good ink sits in paper. We sat in his little office over a laundromat while dryers turned. I told him I wanted to put walls where doors had been. He nodded as if I'd said something he respected. We made a packet. That's what he called it. Not a plan. A packet. Papers gather weight. Weight is useful. I did not show Kara the packet. When she sent me a link at midnight to an article about the dangers of seniors and stairs, I thumbed a reply. Sweetheart, I'm careful, and then I opened the notebook and wrote the time, and that I had answered and that my hands were steadier after I did it. Under the awning now, I could feel the little notebook at the bottom of my clutch the way you can feel a key you haven't used in a long time. A courier van slid past with its hazard lights ticking, and the church gave me another quarter hour. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then thought better of it. Headlights turned into the alley and cut to low beams as they neared. Harris parked with the careful precision of a man who has parallel parked in a city for 20 years and hasn't given up loving the exactness of it. He stepped out with a leather case in one hand, shut the door with his hip, and looked at me as if he were checking the horizon rather than my face. Evening, Mrs. Hale. He glanced toward the glittering windows. Do you prefer we work in the car, or is there a quiet corner inside? The coat check, I said. They'll pretend not to hear. We went in through the side door. The hallway smelled like citrus and damp wool. I nodded to the attendant who recognized me and immediately discovered a sudden interest in rearranging hangers 3 inches to the left. Harris set the case on a waist-high counter and clicked it open. Inside, the papers were stacked in envelopes marked with a small penciled code. He had the kind of handwriting students use to earn compliments for. He looked at me once, a pause with a question tucked inside. "Are you certain?" "I am," I said. My voice sounded like one of the better rooms at the Harbor Light, small, clean of view you don't have to crane for. "Then we'll do this carefully." He slid out the first set. "This cancels your personal guarantees connected to their lease effective upon notice. We'll courier a copy tonight and email the managing agent." He slipped me a pen and my name went where it had gone 1,000 times steady full. The second set stopped the monthly transfers from my accounts to theirs. The third, he rested a finger on it, concerned the event across the hall. I read each page, I signed. Paper accumulated, and with it an invisible heft that made my shoulders lower by degrees. "Logistics," he said. "The hotel." He didn't say more. I shook my head. That piece is already protected. It was not bravado. It was work I had done some months ago with another folder and another day of rain. He nodded as if a knot had untied under his fingers. A burst of applause rose and fell through the walls, followed by the scrape of a microphone being found and then lost again. Kara's laugh has a bright edge you can hear from 50 feet. It cut, then vanished, then cut again. Harris capped his pen with a practiced quiet click. "All right," he said. "We have what we need." We stood a minute in the narrow corridor, the hum of the building flattening into something like weather. He rested his hand lightly over the case. I touched my collarbone and felt the place the chain had marked. "You want a moment alone?" he asked. "I've had it," I said. On the way back to the side door, I passed the framed photograph of the ballroom from the year I could have been newly married if life had arranged itself that way. Women in tea-length dresses, men with slicked hair, a band with a saxophone player who was likely better than the job required. The caption underneath named donors by last name only. The picture made a promise without knowing it that rooms keep receiving what people bring into them. I stepped into the alley again and let the air sit cold in my lungs. A couple in formal wear slid past, arguing in a whisper that had the earnestness of two actors who think the curtain is still down. When they reached the corner, they composed themselves and went in with their best faces glued on. The Harbor Light would be finishing turn-down service right now. The small lamps on nightstands would be breathing their weak gold. The ocean would be speaking louder than the television in room 12. My night clerk Doris would be making tea because her hands believe in the ritual of pouring. I could have been there slicing limes for tomorrow's seltzers, laying out invoices in to-do piles moving through the stairwell, where the smell of lemon oil turns a corner into a promise. Instead, I stood with the city's salt in my hair and the ballroom's light at my back. May called. I answered because she wouldn't stop until I did. "I'm outside," I said. "You need me?" she asked. "I need you to be on the Harbor Light's desk in the morning," I said. "Doris will want company." "I'll bring pastries," she said, and the kindness of it lodged where breath lives. "Evelyn." "Yes." "Stand straight." "Always," I said and hung up. Harris appeared at my elbow again. The case now closed and locked. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "The manager knows where to find us." "He will," I said. I had spoken to him earlier on a day with less sequins and more daylight. He is the sort of man who knows how to be discreet without being complicit. We walked along the building to the service corridor that feeds the ballroom through a set of double doors. The carpet there is a kind of institutional gray chosen by people who think gray behaves. Voices carried like thin water along tile. The scent of buttercream drifted out and did its best to act innocent. Harris's shoes made no sound. Mine did polite taps that matched the pace of someone who is not hurrying and not hesitating. At a junction where a light bulb always flickers, he stepped back half a pace and let me go first. As we paused by the threshold, a violin note stretched and went still, the kind of still that knows what it's for. I opened my clutch, checked the stack he had handed me, slid the pen into the small loop where I keep it for bills and signatures. The broken chain pressed against the leather like a faint heartbeat. I didn't put it on. I didn't need to. I set my hand on the bar of the door and felt the push of the room on the other side. The metal was cool smooth from years of hands. I did not look at Harris. He did not look at me. I pressed. The door moved. The light shifted over my shoes. The air changed temperature by a degree you wouldn't notice unless you had worked in rooms like this your whole life. Somewhere near the bandstand, someone set a glass on a table with care and with force at the same time. I stepped forward into the sound. The door eased and gave, and the room's heat met the harbor air I carried in on my coat. The ballroom kept its glitter but lost its angle. Somewhere a violin string settled the note it had been holding, finding its chair again. Faces turned by instinct, you feel a change before you place it, and then they turned further when they understood who had returned. Kara saw me first. A bright hitch crossed her mouth, then smoothed. She laid a hand on Ethan's sleeve, almost tender, almost a signal. Harris stepped to my left and stopped where our shoulders did not touch. The The case in his hand might have been a tray if you didn't know what a tray fails to hold. I did not aim for a stage. I crossed the edge of the dance floor the way you cross a busy street, not timid, not adversarial, simply certain of your timing. At the nearest table, a woman's bracelets chimed. Someone whispered, there and then wished the word back into their throat. The venue manager moved from the margin with professional calm. I had spoken to him in daylight, an ordinary man with a good tie and an allergy to spectacle. Mrs. Hale, he said quietly. His eyes clocked Harris, the case my face. Do you need a smaller room? A small space inside a large one, I said. Right here will do. He gave the smallest nod, then reached to the bandstand and touched the DJ's sleeve. The song collapsed on a soft beat. 2 chandeliers held their breath. Kara's voice splashed into the new quiet. Mother. She cut the word into 2 meanings at once. The bride and the daughter in it fought behind her teeth. Ms. Hale, the manager, said at a normal volume that audiences recognize as official. We'll pause briefly. He looked toward Kara with the kind of respect that comes with invoices. You'll want to hear this as well. Ethan straightened his jacket, his mouth already shaping a grin meant to win over juries that had come for cake. This is a celebration, he announced to no one and everyone. No need for administration. Harris set the case on a side table and opened it with a single unhurried motion. The sound carried like the opening of a letter that has been waiting. He did not step forward. He let the room come to him. Good evening, he said, voice even not amplified and not the less for it. I'm Harris Reed, counsel to Mrs. Evelyn Hale. I'll be brief and precise. Phones rose at the edges like flowers that bloom to electric rather than sun. Ethan laughed light and practiced. You're kidding. Lawyers at weddings, what's next? Auditors at christenings? A few dutiful smiles appeared and regretted themselves at once. Harris looked at him once and then removed the top document. Effective at the time stamped on this notice, he said, Mrs. Hale rescinds and terminates her personal guarantee on the Midtown lease occupied by Ms. Kara Hale and Mr. Ethan Kell. Notice has been served to the managing agent. He placed the paper on the linen. The manager, who had reappeared as if the table were suddenly. His desk slid it into a clear sleeve and read the header with the speed of a man used to sorting invoices in bad light. A sound moved through the room, something like a breeze finding a door that had been shrugged shut but not latched. Kara's chin didn't lower, her gaze did not hunt. She stared straight at me as if looking away would waste a weapon. Harris took a second sheet. Effective tonight, he continued, all standing transfers from Mrs. Hale's accounts to those of Ms. Hale and Mr. Kell are canceled. The banks have confirmed receipt. He spoke the numbers like temperatures, no outrage, no apology. Faces in the room did the math without wanting to, the way people will when figures touch the floor they stand on. Ethan's smile thinned to a line. Is this your moment, Evelyn? He said cheerfully, his voice pitched for guests. You wanted a toast and decided to read a budget instead. His hand found Kara's squeeze, then let go, the way you let go of a rope when you suspect it's tied to something heavy. I didn't answer. There is a way to stand that belongs to people who've waited out weather with a flashlight and a mop. I let the posture find me. Harris placed the third set on the table and removed the binder clip. And finally, he said each syllable clean. Mrs. Hale revokes her guarantee for expenses associated with this event venue, vendor contracts, associated services. The venue will need to address payment arrangements with the parties directly responsible. The DJ touched his headphones as if the sound might explain law. The manager's polite face turned a degree more made of wood. He looked toward Kara, then toward Ethan, the way good staff look when the bill has arrived at a table that doesn't expect it. A ripple of whispering moved outward like rings from a stone dropped not quite dead center. You can't do that, Kara said, but the sentence lacked a subject. Her voice found me, and then lost me. You promised. I signed, I said. It is a different verb. Ethan leaned in as if he might help the room decide what to believe. Everyone relax, he told the room softly, as if mic'd to a benediction. There's a misunderstanding. Ms. Hale is under stress. We'll sort it out privately. The manager cleared his throat, a small necessary sound. Mr. Kell, he said, professional as a coat on a hook, will need a card on file. Color shifted in Ethan's face, not blushing, not blanching in expensive paint, finding the wrong primer. Of course, he said. He took out a wallet and held it like a prop that might convince the back row. Harris didn't turn hostile. That's not what paper needs. For clarity, he said no action tonight touches the ownership or control of the Harbor Light, and a few heads turned hunting that name in their memory. That matter has been settled for some time. Kara's eyes flickered. What do you mean, settled? Exactly what it means, Harris said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. There was a moment then when the room tried to remember what party meant. The band looked to the DJ looked to the manager looked at the paper in the sleeve. The light did what light does, kept being light. It is remarkable how a space resists meaning until someone lays it down. Kara closed the distance between us in 3 measured steps, her train finding its own logic across the parquet. Up close, the makeup was perfect except for one corner of her mouth, where the red had thinned a place that would not hold color. "You're trying to humiliate me," she said quietly enough for the nearest 10 to him to hear and the farthest 50 to imagine. "You did that," I said not unkindly. "You want me homeless," she pressed. "You want me begging. You want me punished." She stacked possibilities like plates. "I want my name back," I said. Her eyes did a small quick thing, anger springing, then restrained. "Years," she said. "I gave you years of my plans. I gave you investors. I gave you ways out of that relic. You'd rather die in a boiler room than let me turn it into something that matters." "The harbor light matters," I said. I did not have to raise my voice for it to reach the far tables. Ethan rejoined us with a smile restored and a manager following the sleeve, now holding a credit card, as if it were evidence. The manager's politeness was complete and uniform. "We'll sort the remaining balances directly with you, Mr. Kell," he said. "Congratulations again." He said the last as if remembering to set down a napkin. Ethan lowered his voice to me. "You had every chance to do this with Grace." I thought of how many chances Grace had already been given and how it had been mistaken for permission. "We're done," I said. A sound rose from the bar, a sigh, collected laughter, strangled and then drained away. Harris stood where he had been the case, shut once more, his hands at rest on the lid. I walked to the microphone because it was there, because I am not fond of whisper campaigns, because the room had already decided to turn my family into content, and I did not intend for them to do the editing. I didn't touch the stand. I stood a foot off and used my voice as if speaking to a clerk at a counter. "Thank you for being here," I said. "Please enjoy the night. The music is talented. The cake is beautiful. You are not required to choose a side to finish your dessert." A few people smiled the smile you make when someone fixes a tilted picture, and you only then realize it had been crooked. I stepped back. Harris inclined his head almost invisibly. We did not bow. Kara's features reorganized, every expression she owns trying on the room's temperature. Something like panic flashed and left grief behind it, the theatrical kind, too bright. She reached for Ethan's hand and found his cuff instead. He didn't pull away, not exactly. He let his sleeve be her answer. I turned toward the exit the way you turn toward the end of a corridor you've cleaned 100 times. My heels were the right kind of quiet. Handsome people moved to let me pass and tried not to be seen doing it. Near the door, May slipped into my line of sight as if she had existed there all along, a woman in a dark shawl with a face that looks like a fact. She didn't ask. She touched my elbow the way a good nurse touches an edge of skin to sense heat. "You standing?" she said. "I'm standing," I said. "Good," she said. She looked once toward the head table. Emma, one of our summer front desk girls invited because she had babysat a donor's child and been swept into the tide, met my eye and gave the smallest nod. The nod's message was simple: someone saw. Outside the doors, the corridor breathed again. Sound returned to its ordinary size. The manager caught up, his voice lowered to a pitch the chandeliers could not overhear. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "we'll handle what's ours." I know I said and meant it. We found the coat check where we had left it. Harris slid the documents into their envelopes, smoothed the edges with a hand that liked edges, and locked the case. "There will be noise," he said. "Ignore it. Paper is already walking." "I have practice ignoring noise," I said. He smiled without showing teeth. "Yes," he said. May studied my neck, the thin crescent where the chain had been, but she didn't touch. "Come home," she said. "I'll make tea. We'll count something spoons if we have to." "I have to stop at the harbor light," I said. "Of course you do," she said, as if I had suggested breathing on the way to a staircase. We stepped into the vestibule. The cold slid its palm under my shawl with the permission of a familiar. Harris offered to walk us to the car. I declined with thanks, some distances you cross by yourself for your feet to believe you. A cluster of guests gathered near the curb, lit cigarettes and opinions. One of them said my name like a warning. I kept walking. At the curb, May unlocked the old sedan I wouldn't trade for anything that still smells like showroom. She tucked herself into the passenger seat as if the car had grown for her shape. Before I rounded to the driver's side, I looked back once. Through the glass, the ballroom glittered, doing its job with all the determination of a set built to be seen. A shadow moved on the stage where a speech had nearly started. The band conferred. A cake knife flashed. I drove the long block to the harbor light with the window cracked for the salt. The hotel stood where it always does, plain and resolute, its letters sanded softer by storms. The front lamps kept their modest halos. Through the glass, I saw Doris at the desk, her cardigan a color you only notice in good light. When I opened the door, the bell gave its small good chime. Doris looked up, then looked again. She does not gossip at work. It is a religion with her. "Evening, Mrs. H," she said. "Heavier out there than in here." "Weather shifts," I said, at setting my clutch on the counter, exactly in the square I always use. "How's the boiler doing?" Like a man with opinions, she said, relieved to have an ordinary complaint to present. "We're humoring him with patience." "Good," I said. I signed 2 late arrivals with a pen that has known my hand longer than some cousins. In the reflection of the front door, I could see the garnet in the clutch, a dark red blink. I did not take it out. I did not put it away. May moved through the lobby the way family does. Curtains adjusted a fraction, a stray travel magazine squared to the stack, 2 tulips rescued from a vase where they'd been suffocating. Kettle, she asked. Please, I said. The office behind the desk has a low chair that remembers Tom. I sat there and felt the wood settle. The wall calendar read, a month I kept forgetting to replace. No one minds. The ledger lay where I had left it, a thin arc in the leather telling me which page I'd stopped on. I opened the drawer and took out the narrow notebook. I printed 2 lines beneath the last entry, with the clean severity of someone doing what is required. Saturday, Royal Maris notices served, guarantees revoked, payment redirected. I added a time. I underlined the time. T. May said, setting the mug on a coaster like a dock for a small boat. She perched on the office threshold. We let the steam do its work. From the lobby, Doris's voice threaded soft as a knit. A couple checked in on points. Someone asked where the nearest pharmacy stayed open late. Somewhere upstairs, a door clicked as if finishing a sentence. Do you want me to call Anna? May asked, meaning our cousin who lives 2 towns over, meaning the kind of person who sits with you until walls go back to being walls. No, I said, let's keep it local. She nodded, satisfied with the word. Local to us means a radius drawn by how far the harbor wind can reach. Harris texted, delivered, receipts attached, efficient, humane. I replied with a period. He would understand. I took the chain from the clutch at last and held it in my palm. Without Kara's hands on it, the damage looked less dramatic, more honest. The clasp had failed where the metal thinned from years of being undone and done again. The stone had a small nick you would not notice if you were looking for shine rather than history. I set it in the top drawer beside Tom's old room keys, 2 of which no longer belong to any lock but remain anyway because some metal has earned its false work. Ready? May asked. In a minute, I said. I walked out to the lobby and stood with my hand on the carved rail of the staircase. I like to feel exactly which parts of the building are my height. The carpet smelled faintly of wool and lemon oil. Through the window, the harbor folded light back toward the town. A couple in their 20s came in sundown on their shoulders, and I watched them watch the lobby, how their faces made a small exhale. You can't fake when a place tells you you're allowed to belong. The phone at the desk rang. Doris answered. Harbor Light, she sang. Her voice sharpened a degree. She glanced at me. I lifted my hand, palm open. Go on. Yes, she's here, she said into the receiver, but she's not taking calls right now. A pause. You can send an email. Another pause. Good night. She hung up with the grace of a person who declines the unkind and refuses to make it a war. Who? May asked. Doris looked apologetic. The other Ms. Hale, she said. May nodded like a gavel landing. Tea, she repeated, meaning fortify, not distract. We drank. The steam gave up. The mug made a circle on the coaster, a shade darker than the wood. The hotel's clock made its ordinary sound. My hands steadied farther than they had earlier, and the room accepted me as if returning a borrowed shawl to my shoulders. Come on, May said at last. Beds don't turn themselves. We made a short round. Habits have a way of pulling you back to your right size. We straightened, a runner checked a latch that likes to flirt with mischief, draped a blanket to hide a nick in an arm of a chair I love. In room 12, a couple had left their window open to the water. I closed it to a hand's width so the ocean would speak and not shout. In the hallway, May flicked a light off and then on because she claims some lamps forget their job unless they're reminded. By the time we returned to the desk, the night had found its temperature. Harris's case, my shawl, May's scarf, all the things that had shared the air with other people's demands now sat quiet in our small square of the world. Doris slid the registration tray into the drawer. You want me to stay a little late? She asked. It was not obligation. It was offer. We're fine, I said. Go home to your dog. He's a cat, she said for the 1000th time and smiled with the relief of rituals that survive storms. I locked the front door after her and watched her descend the steps. The glass held my reflection a moment, silver hair, red mark. Thin at the throat, shoulders, leveled eyes, their ordinary size, and then the harbor replaced me with itself. May touched my arm. Bedtime, she said. Leave the world to itself for a while. I can do that, I said. We turned off the desk lamp, then turned it on again at a lower setting because the lobby looks wrong without a heartbeat. I picked up the clutch, slid the notebook back into the drawer, pressed the drawer until it found the soft click I like, and let the building take the rest. Upstairs, the hallway held its quiet like a well-made bed. The floor answered our steps with wood sounds that say we've been here and will be again. At the apartment door, May went ahead, humming a scrap of nothing. I paused a second, listening to the hotel breathe. The garnet lay warm where my hand had held it. The place on my collarbone cooled without it. I set the chain on the dresser and turned the cup on the bedside table so the handle faced the way my fingers expect. From the window, the boardwalk's lights stitched the edge of the water. Somewhere back at the Royal Maris, someone cut the cake. Here, a pressure valve sighed and was content. The night took its shape around the rooms we kept. Morning arrived, ordinary coffee, the harbor breathing under a pale sky. Doris humming as she counted change into the till. Ordinary is a brave costume. By noon, the ordinary began to split. A florist called the Royal Maurice to ask about a declined card. The ballroom manager sent a courteous email with an attached balance. A cousin forwarded a clip someone had taken on their phone. Kara in white, my hand at my collarbone, the music halted mid-step. I watched 10 seconds of it, then turned the screen face down and finished reconciling the weekend deposits. By late afternoon, the messages started. Kara first sharp, quick like tapping a glass. You humiliated me. We'll fix this if you reverse it now. An hour later. Contrition, I was upset. I didn't mean the necklace. Put the transfer back just for this month. Near midnight, Ethan. If you force this, we'll have to involve counsel. Your behavior at the reception was erratic in public. I placed the phone on the desk, set a paperweight on top, a brass lighthouse that is held down more than bills, and wrote in the notebook, calls and texts, 6. Tone swing between demand and plea, no reply. 2 mornings after the ballroom, a thick envelope slid under my apartment door. The seal on the corner had a quartz crest that always looks older than the paper it rides. I made tea, sat at the table that faces the water, and read, petition for appointment of guardian. The words arranged me into a portrait I did not recognize, subject to impulsive outbursts, irrational financial choices, vulnerable to self-harm through mismanagement. Attached were statements from 3 wedding guests, people I've known only by their holiday sweaters who said they'd see me behave in a way that raised concerns. I closed the folder. The kettle ticked itself quiet. I set the petition on the counter and called Harris. I imagined this would be next, he said. I've already opened a file. They're asking a court to put my name under theirs, I said. They're asking a court to consider it, he corrected. We'll let the record speak. He came within the hour. He read slow as if tasting every word for poison. He set my notebook between us. He slid from his case the stack I had signed in the coat check, and behind those older stacks, bank transfers I had made receipts, tucked neatly where they belonged, records of tuition payments, a copy of the trust we had put in place months ago when the roofs were kind and the stairs had not yet become a sermon. We built a second packet, this one with tabs. His pen moved, making small square letters that never hurry. We'll need an affidavit from May, he said, and from Doris if she's comfortable. May will write before you ask, I said. Doris will say only what can be said in good light. He nodded. That's enough. The hearing was scheduled faster than I expected. Courts prefer to decide guardianship matters before rumor hardens into something that looks like fact. On the morning of May pressed a rectangle of gauze over the small crescent still visible at my collarbone. Mostly healed, she said. Don't hide it. The courthouse smelled of old polish and patience. Kara arrived wearing gray the way penitents wear hair shirts. Ethan hovered half a step behind and a degree to the right as if he were a hologram whose projector had shifted. Their lawyer beamed confidence that belonged in a brochure. We rose when the judge entered. He was a man whose hair surrendered early and whose eyes knew the difference between theater and testimony. Kara's counsel went first. He spoke smoothly about daughters who worry about older mothers alone in labor-intensive environments, about documented instability during family celebrations. He gestured gently toward me like a docent introducing a fragile object. When he finished, he handed up their exhibits, screenshots of texts in which I had replied too briefly to long requests, 4 still images from the ballroom video, 2 letters from people who liked Kara's smile. Harris stood. He did not warm the room. He leveled it. Your Honor, he said, Mrs. Hale is 72. 72, widowed, and the proprietor of a functional business she has operated for decades. She keeps records. I'd like to show you some. He began not with the trust or the guarantees, but with pages copied from my ledger where I had noted occupancy rates, oil deliveries, payroll dates, the week the ice machine refused to fuse. He laid down the transfers I had made to Kara and Ethan over the past 3 years, rent credit cards, a certificate course, another certificate course. He placed beside those the documents I had signed at the Royal Maurice, each stamped, received by parties who keep time for a living. Then he pressed a key on a laptop. The video from the ballroom flickered on the courtroom monitor, the clip that had flown farther than the harbor wind ever could. We watched a younger person in lace reach and rip a sound of beads or garnets scattering faces, turning a room that held its breath and found nothing to do with it. The judge leaned forward, hands steepled but not pious. This, Harris said, is not a woman incapable of choosing. This is a woman choosing without drama. He lifted the trust. And this, he tapped the tab, is the structure that has shielded her work from exactly what is before you. He did not look at Kara when he said it. He did not have to. Kara's lawyer objected twice, once on relevance, once on sentiment. He lost both. Harris saved one paper for last. It was a printout of an email chain from Ethan's father to Ethan and Kara obtained by means I did not need to know. The subject line read, "Strategy if E refuses." The body advised tone safety sells urgency persuades and suggested retaining counsel to initiate capacity review. The judge read the chain page by page and set it down in front of him without speaking. He turned to me. "Mrs. Hale," he said not unkindly. "Do you pay your bills?" "Yes," I said. "Who prepares your taxes?" "A firm in town. I sign after everything is explained." "Who decides your payroll?" "I do," I said. "We add hours in summer and after storms." He nodded once the nod people make when a picture comes into focus. He returned to Kara. "Ms. Hale, do you contest the authenticity of the emails?" Kara's voice thinned. "My father-in-law meant well." "That's not a contest," the judge said gently. He ruled then. Clear spare without scold or embroidery. The petition was denied. There was no evidence of incompetence. There was ample evidence of a daughter and son-in-law pressing financial advantage under the costume of worry. He referred a copy of the record to the district attorney's office for review under the statute. Nobody likes to read the one about exploiting elders. We stood. The room exhaled. Kara did not look at me as we filed out. In the corridor, she pressed her fingers to her eyes and shook Ethan's arm as if trying to wake a better version of the man she had married. He shook her off with a gentleness that pretends not to mean it. May and I stepped into noon. The square shone. Gulls made their ordinary loops. Harris shook my hand on the steps and said only paper walked. I thanked him. We parted at the corner where the bakery sets out the day's first tray of sugared things. The harbor light took me in with the bell I have never stopped liking. I went to the office, opened the narrow notebook, and wrote court petition, denied. Record referred. I put down the time, and because I felt myself doing something I would want later, I underlined it. The days that followed had their own weather. Bills found their way to their rightful owners. A moving truck appeared outside Kara and Ethan's building sooner than I would have guessed, and then appeared again when a check didn't clear. Texts shifted from fury to something like fog to silence, which is a kind of speech. I did not answer. May answered when answering was required, with forms with signatures, with the gentle insistence of a person who has learned what not to carry. I took the garnet chain to a jeweler who keeps his workbench in a narrow shop that smells faintly of lemon and metal. He examined the clasp with a loop and said, "Not hard, but it will leave a line." He soldered while I waited. I read half a newspaper article I didn't care for and 2 lines of a poem that knew exactly what to do with light. When he handed the necklace back, the repair showed if you looked for it and vanished if you did not. "Strong as it needs to be," he said. "I paid in cash and wore it home. The chain did not erase the crescent at my throat. It framed it." I felt the cool weight settle exactly where it always had, and something in my spine matched it, vertebrae, finding their familiar. Work returned to its proper size. The boiler kept his opinions, the reservation system sulked on Tuesdays, and Doris found a way to coax the front door when the humidity swelled the wood. We trained a new night clerk, a serious young man who writes in block letters. I asked him to keep the ledger and pencil until his numbers learned the place. The rooms filled on weekends. People still came to the harbor to hear the water speak louder than their lives. There were visitors I did not expect. Mr. Phelps, who has returned every August since his wife died, brought a single peony and placed it on the desk without commentary. "For whatever you need it to be," he said. A young couple checked in and whispered, unaware that voices carry toward people who stand still long enough. "Is she the one?" "Yes, that's her." They smiled at me the way you smile at the person who tells a town it was allowed to be itself. I put them in room 7, which remembers anniversaries kindly. May moved into the staff apartment next to mine as if she had been waiting outside the door for permission she didn't need. She filled the small kitchen with jars of tea and a stubborn plant that refuses to die. At night, we played gin rummy and did not keep score. She kept an eye on my posture. I kept an eye on her tendency to swallow aspirin and call it dinner. I wrote a letter to Kara, not to send, to say what could be said without performance. I told her I remembered her whistling in the stairwell and the bow she took at 9 when she learned which directions applause comes from. I told her the harbor light is not a vault. It is a set of rooms that ask to be kept. I told her the door would be open if she came without taking. I placed the letter in the ledger's drawer beneath Tom's set of keys that no longer open anything but lie there, because some metal earns its keep by memory. Ethan sent a certified letter once. It suggested settlement terms that had the weight of paper but not sense. Harris answered with the economy of someone who prefers verbs to adjectives. The matter quieted. Spring turned as it does. The harbor changed blues. We replaced 2 window screens and the runner on the 3rd-floor landing. A school group came through and pounded soft cake into the carpet. The maintenance man pretended to curse and cleaned because that is the arrangement people live we keep. One evening, the lobby held a kind of light only water understands. Doris had gone home to her cat that is not a dog. May arranged tulips in a jug that has survived more moves than a person should ask of pottery. I stood by the front doors, hand on the brass, and watched the street. Across the way, a figure stood in the pool of a lamppost. She wore a coat the color of apology. She shifted weight as if the ground had opinions. Kara did not cross. She looked at the harbor light the way people look at rooms they grew up in and no longer own. I opened one door halfway. The night slid in cool and honest. We stood like that with air moving between us long enough for a gull to cut the square once and vanish. I did not beckon. She did not bolt. Neither of us pretended the door was anything but what it was. I let it rest on the hinge and eased it shut, not locked, settled. May set 2 cups on the desk mint for me, something darker for her. We sat where Tom used to sit when the world needed counting. The chain lay against my skin, the mended place no longer tender. I opened the ledger and wrote the day's last line. Lamps turn low, harbor steady. I put down the time and closed the book. The hotel breathed its small good breath. Somewhere a guest laughed, the kind of laugh that admits it needed a bed and a window. The boardwalk lights stitched their simple seam along the water. I stood, touched the cool brass of the door, and turned the key just enough to tell the night we were here. Enough, and this enough was mine. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.